All right, welcome everyone to our sixth lecture on current and discussion on current issues in Labour's economic policy. My name is Ewan McGaughey, great to see all of you here. Today we're going to be discussing housing because there are big proposals afoot which we're going to go through, and so like all the lectures up till now, we'll go through the pledges that have been made, what the current legal background is in the UK, what the data says, and different options to change, perhaps going beyond what is already pledged, because this government has been saying again and again and again that a lot of things that it's doing in the first few months are first steps. And to put it bluntly, there's a lot of steps that need to be made for housing. Just a quick survey. Hands up if you've ever had a bad landlord. Okay, yeah, that's a fair few people. Hands up if you are a bad landlord. No, okay, fine. Yeah, so it's a fairly common problem, especially for if you're an academic, for all of our students, that we have routinely bad housing and bad experiences. Not all of them, but many of them. And that is something that is likely to change somewhat. The question is how much. Okay, so same as before. I'll talk for the first half. The second half, we've got two fantastic discussants. Dr. Joanna Kusiak, who's come all the way from Berlin and is a lead campaigner there on public housing, and Pollak, who has come all the way from Camberwell and works for the West Midlands Combined Authority. I'll say more about them a bit later. Okay, so let's start with the pledges. Labour says in its manifesto, page 79 and 80, that they will legislate where the Conservatives failed, overhauling the regulation of the private rented sector, immediately abolish Section 21 no-fault evictions, prevent private renters from being exploited and discriminated against, and empower them to challenge unreasonable rent increases and take steps to decisively raise standards. Labour will finally bring the feudal leasehold system to an end. We're going to enact the Law Commission's proposals on the right to manage enfranchisement and commonhold, and take further steps to ban new leasehold flats. So that's the sort of first big part relating to rent. And then the second thing, in a different place in the manifesto, Labour says that it wants to get Britain building again, creating jobs across England with 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament. So I guess that's 300,000 every year. Restoring mandatory housing targets, we will ensure that planning authorities have up-to-date local plans and reform and strengthen the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Labour will further reform compulsory purchase compensation rules to improve land assembly, speed up site delivery, and deliver housing infrastructure, amenity, and transport benefits in the public interest. So there's a lot of things there, but we can summarise it in this way if we sort of add up the sort of three main things that we're going to focus on today. First of all, there's reforms surrounding renters' rights, making sure that there is a right to reasons before eviction, challenging unreasonable rent increases, and this cryptic phrase, raising standards. Second thing is not renters' rights, but feudal rights, and getting rid of them. So abolishing long leaseholds in favour of new system of commonhold and freehold. And then thirdly, there's this package of proposals about increasing home ownership, 1.5 million homes, more sustainable development, and reform to compulsory purchase rules, which is said to be in the public interest. And so, as before, let's compare this to the human rights that we've got in international law. We'll go through the legal background in the UK today, see where we sit internationally in our standards versus other countries around the world, what the options are for reform, and a little bit about the costs and benefits of reform. Internationally, we are part of the European Social Charter, covers every country in Europe, and it says that everyone has the right to housing. Not just the right to not be deprived of housing, you have a positive right to housing. But then, of course, The interpretation of that might go a number of different ways. There's not very much jurisprudence on it at all, but everyone has the right to housing. Also, we have a human right which constrains some of the things that we're talking about. Article 1 and Protocol 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights sets limits on compulsory purchase policies of different nation states. So it says everyone's entitled to peaceful enjoyment of their possessions. Nobody shall be deprived of their possessions except in the public interest, and subject to general principles of international law. So this matters for compulsory purchase. There's a whole line of case law on what it means, and particularly what the public interest means. When can you compulsorily purchase? And most importantly, how much do you have to pay? And the leading case, I think, in this respect is Lithgow in the United Kingdom. And it says that Article 1, Protocol 1 does not guarantee a right to full compensation if there are legitimate public interest objectives. This was a case about nationalising the aerospace industries in the 1970s. And there it was said that nationalising an industry is complex, more complex than the valuation of land. And you've got to have a fair balance when you set the amount of compensation, and member states have a wide margin of appreciation. So the bottom line is that if you're doing a big compulsory purchase and it's complex, then there's more latitude for a member state to set compensation principles than if you're doing something like a targeted compulsory purchase of land. But also, there is no right to full market compensation under the European Convention. It is a right to fair compensation, not market compensation. And member states have a wide margin of appreciation, so unless they act unreasonably, there's not going to be a problem under the convention. Okay, so how does housing work at the moment in the UK? Three main areas that I want to go through. First on renting and security and standards when you rent. Second, a bit on leaseholds. And thirdly, things relating to home ownership, compulsory purchase, and so forth. Okay, so let's start with the situation with rent. So most people who rent, 94%, have what we call an assured short hold tenancy. And this essentially means that you don't have any rights. You can be evicted without a reason. The rents can be put up to anything you'd like. There is a very small group of people, 4.5%, who have assured tenancies, which means, broadly speaking, that you've got to be given reasons before you're evicted on a statutory list. And then there's a tiny group of people, 0.9%, or maybe it's 0.7, something like that, who still have rent-controlled flats under the 1977 Act. So if you are like most people who rent, the 94%, there is no right whatsoever to anything if your landlord hikes the rents way beyond inflation. What you can do is you can apply to what's called the first-tier tribunal if the rent is significantly higher than similar dwellings in the locality. But significantly higher is a test that is so open and broad that it means that nobody can effectively challenge unreasonable rent increases. So that's the effect of the Housing Act 1988, Section 22. A landlord, if it's a council, so a social landlord as well, a public authority, can also put the rent to whatever they deem reasonable. They can impose such reasonable charges as the council may determine. So no right to fair rents, whether you're in a public house or a private house. And the Renters' Rights Bill that's going through Parliament seeks to change this a little bit. So the first thing, and this is actually quite big, is that it scraps assured short-hold tenancies. So it's going to mean that everyone is shifted from the 94% into the 4.5%. So tenancies are all going to be assured. And if tenants face above-market rent rises, there is going to be something, which is that they go to the tribunal, and the test is going to change ever so slightly. The tribunal can say the rent has to be what is reasonably expected to be let at in the open market. So if you compare the orange to the light orange to the dark orange, that's the big change in the Renters' Rights Bill. And there's a provision about stopping bidding wars. So if the landlord or an estate agent advertises a certain rent, then that is the rent that actually has to be agreed later on. They can't sort of advertise one thing and then say, well, I've got another tenant that's offering me 10% more, give me 12% extra. So you can't have bidding wars. You've got to have the advertised rent as the actual rent that is finally agreed. What about rights to security in your home? Well, up till now, there has not been much, or at least since the 80s, there has not been much. So under the infamous Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988, landlords can get a court order to evict you without any reason whatsoever at the end of a short hold tenancy. So the period is up, the contractual period, which might be as little as 6 months. Then they can go to the court and get you ejected if they've only given you 2 months' notice. So the Renters' Rights Bill is going to change this in a significant way because, as we just said, short hold tenancies are going to be abolished. Everything's going to be assured tenancies. And along with that, the rental agreement that you're meant to get has to be open-ended, so not sort of automatically periodic. Rent payments will have to be monthly. You've got to have at least a year, and reasons have to be given. So what's going to be Schedule 2 of the Housing Act 1988, changed by Schedule 1 of the Renters' Rights Bill, we've got reasons like these ones for why you could be evicted. If you have not paid the rent for about 2 months, the case law suggests that could be a reason that the landlord says you have to go. If you've breached your contract as a tenant, if you've been a nuisance or if you've been violent, if you have damaged the premises, if you are living with your landlord, much easier for your landlord to evict you. And that's a provision that is quite common, probably about making sure that people don't fight too much. And the landlord just sort of wins in law. If a mortgagee, a bank, wants to enforce security, that's a reason for eviction. And the bill is adding another ground to the existing assured tenancy grounds, which is that if the landlord needs to use the property themselves, or a family member of the landlord needs to use the property, then that could be a reason for evicting you. This actually happened to me once upon a time when I lived in Berlin. One day before the end, well before the end of my tenancy, the landlord turned up with his brother and said, "My brother needs the flat." And I was like, really? Well, I need the flat too. But so under German law, as will be the case under English law, they can tell you to go. Okay, so third thing is the standards that we've got for housing in the UK, and they're pretty relaxed. So a home has to be fit for human habitation. Oh, that's good. But there was a big battle to get that provision in just a few years ago. It was seen as a big win. So, yep, has to be fit for human habitation, or at least at the time that the lease is granted. So it might deteriorate and be unfit for human habitation after you've lived there a while, but just as long as it's there fit when you move in, then that's okay. The landlord does have a series of duties to repair the property. They have to repair the structure if there's any damage to the exterior or to water systems or gas or electricity, heating, and the landlord has to sort of pay regard to the need to get rid of damp, ensure that there's natural lighting, and that the structure is stable. So that's all been there in the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985, but it's pretty minimal if we compare internationally. The Renters' Rights Bill looks like it could go a lot further because Section 98 tantalizingly says that the minister can write rules about the state of repair that is necessary for a home, and also, and this is very broad, says that it could include rules about things to be provided by the landlord for use by the tenant, or for the safety, security, or comfort of the people who live there, the dwellers, and the temperature. So potentially, rules could be written that are very broad, that are going much more beyond structural repair, but making sure, who knows, that one thing could be furnishings, it could be cracks in the walls, it could be cosmetic. There's a lot of things that are very important. The temperature could be an insulation. And the minister is able to write rules. And if you've been to previous lectures, this is an emerging theme over the bills that are being passed by the Labour government or being introduced. There's a lot of places where things are being kicked down the road, the can's being kicked down the road. More rules later on, not in the Act itself. Okay, so second part of reforms that Labour is promising relates to leasehold. We can go over this a bit more quickly, but so since 1967, if you have a long lease over 21 years, and you've lived there for 2 years or more, and it's a house, then you have a right to acquire the freehold of the property at the rates in the process agreed under the statute. As you might know, if you sort of ever look in an estate agent window, some houses are freehold, some houses are leasehold, and you can have leases going on for sort of 900, 500 years, however long. And this is one of the main ways in which the aristocracy in Britain has maintained control over land for generations and generations. An act that was already passed by the Conservative government, which Labour says it's going to put into force, because it's not in force yet. They passed it, but they didn't put it in force. The Leasehold and Reform Act 2024 bans leaseholds going for more than 21 years. So you can't have these sort of 900-year leases anymore that allows the Earl of Grosvenor to keep control of most of Mayfair and Belgravia. And it creates the right to buy at a reasonable value immediately without having to wait for 2 years. Now, this right to buy was really the original right to buy, but of course Margaret Thatcher spread the concept to all council homes. So the Housing Act 1985, section 126, is the famous right to buy, which says that council tenants, if you're a secure tenant, which is like an assured tenant in the private sector, can buy the freehold from the council, usually with a discount of 60 or 70% for flats. And the only provision really that restricts them is that you're not meant to sell the council home for 5 years after. So that's the right to buy, and you've got something similar with long leaseholds. Third sort of field for background is relating to home building. So if Labour wants to get 1.5 million extra homes built, then this is the sort of stuff that really matters. The first thing is that councils around England and Wales, and in fact the whole UK, are very constrained in the degree to which they can compulsorily purchase property. So if you're a council, unlike before, you can only purchase land compulsorily if you got approval of the Secretary of State, the Minister. And of course, the Minister doesn't give approval very often. Second point. We have something called real estate investment trusts in the UK, which are a vehicle through which lots of very large properties, like think of blocks of flats, worth over 20 million with at least 3 properties, are held. So if you're a real estate investment trust and you incorporate and you say that you're a real estate investment trust, then you don't have to pay corporate tax, even though it is a company, on the profits and capital gains that you make from running that residential business. The only provision, or the only real proviso, is that one of the things in your property portfolio has to be rented out, not all of them. So you could be holding lots and lots of property. It could be buildings, it could be vacant land, it could be anything. And just as long as one of them is being rented out, then you get this exemption from the normal rules of corporation tax. In London, I don't know if you sort of have this experience, but often you go past these huge blocks of flats, especially around the sort of Thames area, around Nine Elms, where all these new buildings are going up, and it seems like they're eerily empty. And part of the reason for that is that there are exemptions from council tax if landlords keep homes empty. So there's an additional council tax that people have to pay, but only if a home is left empty for 1 year or more. If you have a business property that's left empty, for 3 months you have an exemption from paying business rates. And so what this means is that landlords, property owners, can leave property empty for longer, and that ensures that they have more bargaining power, so that they don't have to rent out at the price that the market would otherwise require. Fourth point is that under the building regulations, new buildings have to be energy efficient, to some degree at least, they should be nearly zero energy, or to a very significant extent powered by energy from renewable sources, produced on-site or nearby. But this is a very broad aspiration, and it is mainly about building materials. It doesn't go into anything like the generation itself, for instance, with solar panels or batteries that could be installed in homes. And the final point, which I think is important for thinking about home ownership, is, like a couple of lectures ago, what the Bank of England does in its calculations for inflation. So remember from a couple of lectures ago, the Bank of England, of course, has control over monetary policy. It can put the base interest rate up or down. It usually does this so as to combat inflation. So if it puts interest rates up, private banks also put their interest rates up, and that can dampen inflation, depending on where the inflation is coming from. But when the Bank of England is making all these decisions, it doesn't include in its inflation calculation the cost of mortgage payments. So there's different kind of ways of measuring inflation. The old one was called the retail price index, which included all rents and mortgage costs. But we shifted to what's called the consumer price index, and an extra one that includes rental costs but not mortgage costs. And so the Bank of England uses or measures inflation with a basket of goods, but not mortgage costs. So that means that when it's making its monetary policy decisions about whether they want to put up interest rates or not, it's not taking into account the effect on homeowners of mortgage costs. And although rent costs are included, if you put up mortgage rates, then landlords are likely to pass those extra costs on to rents. So the effect of this is that it tends to make, or it doesn't take into account the extent to which the Bank of England might be making housing more unaffordable. Okay, so where does the UK sit in relation to other countries in the sort of package of its housing policies and the economic and social outcomes? How does this sort of, I mean, really a system that is shaped dominantly in the Thatcher years in the 1980s, how has this played out? The sort of idea that there should be more privatization of homes, freeing up landlords to set whatever rents they want, having pretty minimal standards. How has that all worked out? And the answer is it's worked out terribly. So we've got high rents, high prices, serious disrepair with the sixth worst in Europe for home ownership, and we've got lots of unbuilt vacant properties and lots of people with second, third, fourth homes in property development companies. So let's start with rents. Rents have been going up way beyond wage inflation or rises in wages. And house prices go up even further. The relationship between, and this might be debated amongst economists a little bit, but I think it's safe to say that the relationship between house prices and rents is pretty close. Because if you are buying a house as an investment property, you will want to know what the expected future rents are going to be. So the amount that you pay for the house, if you are using it as an investment property, it is going to depend on how much you can earn in the future. The same as if I buy a company share, the price that I will pay for the share is going to depend upon the expected future dividends or the expected capital gains that I can get if I sell the share and the price changes. Okay, so house prices going up even faster than rents, but probably in a sort of logical relationship, and both going up much faster than people's pay. And so that leads the UK to be the sixth worst in the OECD for the proportion of money that people who are renting spend on rent. So we spend over 40% of our disposable incomes on rent, or at least people who rent spend over 40%. And so that black diamond there shows where the UK is in relation to others. So you want to look at the other black diamonds on top, and we're the sixth worst. We're spending lots and lots and lots of money on rent. Longer term, going back further than the first chart, we can see house prices going up, and then there's a crash in the early 90s, and then house prices just start to go up again. and then there's another crash with the subprime mortgage global banking crash in 2008, or 2007, 2008, and then house prices start to go back up once more. So if you look back to 1975, and then compare that to, let's say, 1996, you don't actually have that much change in house prices. Maybe if you take away Black Friday and the peak there, but the same upward trend keeps on resuming. So a higher and higher proportion of our income is going on rent if we're renting, and if we are lucky enough to own homes, then people are in debt to banks for much, much, much longer because mortgage payments are higher as a result of higher house prices. So, it's not as if homeowners actually benefit most from high house prices. The parties that really benefit are landlords, number one, especially large corporate landlords, and banks, number two, because it means for a longer proportion of people's lives, they have secure revenue streams coming from lots of people struggling to repay their mortgages. Okay, what about the quality? So we're paying loads for it. We're paying lots and lots of money for housing, so that should mean that the housing is really good, right? Wrong. We have the smallest homes in Europe, in the UK. Compared to every other member state, we have really, really, really small homes. So if you look at us compared to Germany, the new homes that are built, so, we've got a chance to make them bigger, but we don't. The average property is 76 meters squared, whereas the average property in Germany will be 109 meters squared. And I think just anecdotally, they probably have much higher ceilings as well, although I don't have statistics on that. In 2017, the English Housing Survey from the Ministry of Housing found that 24.5% of private rented houses in England were non-decent. So a quarter are non-decent. 19% are in serious disrepair, 7.2% have damp, and so these are things that can be seriously threatening to people's health and certainly affects their well-being and standard of living. In 2003, it was calculated that it would cost 14 billion to make all homes decent. That would be about 24 billion in total, and that might actually sound like a big number, but if you consider that there's a 1.3 trillion pound government budget each year, over a few years, I mean, that's not a sum of money that is actually too big or too unmanageable. And finally, our homes are pretty cold. 5.4% of UK home dwellers were unable to keep adequately warm, unlike in Germany, where they're warmer. Next, we've got leaseholds. So this problem, I mean, not as big, but just give you an idea of why the government is concerned about it. The number of leaseholds have been going up. So there's 4.7 million leaseholds in England. That's 19% of the housing stock. So that means that even if you buy the house or if you buy the property, the amount that you own is diminishing every year, and then it is going to revert to somebody like this guy, the Earl of Grosvenor. So he inherited all of this stuff in central London when his father died in 2016. So if you walk around Belgravia or Mayfair and you look at a house, chances are this young man owns it because he had an ancestor who married a 12-year-old heiress in 1677, and so that's how you get ahead in England with our current system of property law. There are 2.65 million leaseholds that are owner-occupied. 1.82 million are rented, and that includes some social landlords. And the reason that it was legislated on was because it looked like the number of leaseholds was rising very considerably up to 2023. And a lot of leaseholds were being used for communal flats. So what the government wants to do is say that instead of a landlord that has the reversion of a lease that controls a block of flats where there's lots of tenants, Basically, they should be able to run a block of flats together rather than having to have a landlord in the picture. Okay, third part, house building. So this chart shows our house building in the UK from 1949 up until 2019. The green line shows the total number of houses that were built each year. The blue line shows the amount that was constructed by the private sector. The yellow line is charitable housing associations, and the red line is public building by councils. And so what you can see is that we peaked in our house building at just over 4 million houses per year, and that was probably the Wilson government, or possibly, that's the Wilson government. And then when Thatcher and after Thatcher, the number of houses built each year has gone down very significantly. We've only just reached about 2 million houses. Sorry, I said 3 million, didn't I? 300,000, and I beg your pardon, 200,000 houses now each year in recent years. But the big change is where the first orange arrow is, that you had lots and lots of public building. And with Thatcher on onwards, that's just essentially been eliminated. So Labour wants to build 1.5 million homes a year, and it hasn't built very many yet. So it's going to roughly need 350,000 homes a year. So its target is up there where the second orange arrow is. It's got to have at least another, 150,000, 200,000 extra homes built a year to reach its target. Lots of house building, and in the opposite direction, there's lots of house selling. So if the public sector builds homes, because of the right to buy, they can be sold off, and essentially the council can't capture the full social value for the long term of housing, because people have the right to buy. And this shows how many homes were sold under the right to buy policies from the 1980s forwards. We are becoming very bad at home ownership compared to the rest of Europe. We're now the 6th worst in Europe for home ownership. We used to be doing quite well. We had 73% home ownership in 2007, and that went down to 65% in 2018. And I know the numbers don't quite match, but there's different sources. Those are the sources from Eurostat. And in the chart that we've got here, which is blue line number of owners, and private rent in orange and social housing in green. That's from the English Housing Survey, but roughly similar, and you see the trend, which is that home ownership is going down. And that means, more people out of home ownership, more people into the rented sector. Actually, though, we do have quite a lot of public housing in the UK. So the UK is number 4 in the amount of public housing in the OECD. So we're right down there next to Denmark and Austria and the Netherlands. But a lot of the other countries that have less social housing, so for instance here is Germany, do much, much better at rent regulation. So we've got pretty weak rules on rent regulation and standards. The standards that are, if the standards are high, that's because a council is doing well to advance them. And finally, 1 million homes have been given planning permission but haven't been built. This was found by a Local Government Association report in 2020. So lots and lots of planning permission being given out, but property developers just sitting on it. And there's 1.45 million vacant homes. So, if you're trying to get to your 1.5 million target over Parliament, those are 2 pretty good places to start. I mean, particularly the 1 million homes with planning permission that aren't yet built. And then we've got 2.1 million homes or people that have second properties. And this picture here, I just wanted to give you an example of what a real estate investment trust might do, just sort of sitting on vacant property. This is a picture from Google Earth of a site just next to the National Theatre. just next to the Waterloo building of King's, which some of you might know. And there's been a car park there since I first moved to London. And it's just sat there because it's in somebody's property portfolio. Prime real estate in the center of London must be worth millions, but they're not building on it because the value can just go up and up and up and up, and nothing is done. Okay, so what can we do about all of this? First, go through, in the same order, changing or different models that we've got on options to meet the goals relating to rent security and security or habitability. Second, leasehold and the right to buy. And third, home ownership, compulsory purchase, and planning rules. So, if we want to change rent, then the Renters' Rights Bill could be seen as a step in the right direction. But there are a lot of models to go much further than just having rents able to be challenged if they are more than reasonably expected in an open market. So that's the formulation the Renters' Rights Bill is using. The Rent Act of 1977, which is much stricter, much more restrictive. It has a formula which is loosely based on inflation, a bit more complicated than that, but it restricts the amount that rents can go up each year according to a statutory formula. It's not left to discretion of a tribunal. The German Civil Code, amongst many, many countries around the world, I mean, Canada does rent regulation, the Netherlands, lots of countries have rules on this. It's very sort of tried and tested. Germany has a pretty decent model, which, at least in comparison to the UK, which is that rents can't be increased beyond what is customary in the locality. So this is what they call the rent mirror, or the Mietspiegel, which is that you look around other houses nearby, and landlords can't put up rents more than what is customary in the locality. And there's also a fixed percentage beyond which rents can't rise at 20% over 3 years. You can't have more rent increases than that. But that wasn't seen as enough by a lot of people in Berlin. You could change those numbers, and Berlin's government tried to. First of all, in 2020, it imposed a rent freeze, so it said no more rent rises. And then it said that there should be a maximum of 1.3% rises from 2022 afterwards. But the German Constitutional Court struck that down as being a violation of, well, the Constitution, and but particularly it just said that Berlin didn't have the powers to legislate in this way, so it was void. It conflicted with federal regulation. If you want to change the security rules, it's good to have lists. This is what most countries do if they regulate security of tenure, like the Renters' Rights Bill is going to do. You have the list of reasons for which the landlord may evict you, and if the landlord does anything outside of the reasons in the statute, then the eviction will be unfair. But the main reason that people will be evicted when this bill is passed will be that the landlord says, we're putting rents up, and the tenant says, I can't afford that, and the landlord says, goodbye. So if you want real security of tenure, you actually have to do something about rent regulation, because that is by far the #1 reason why people's security in their homes is precarious or insecure. Third thing, on standards, we don't have anything yet that has sort of positive obligations for clean energy. So new builds could be required to have solar panels. Solar is very cheap, it would cut bills. Battery storage is increasingly cheap. Of course, heat pumps will be coming in, gas boilers will be going out. But so further energy efficiency rules could be a logical next step. And we could also do something about the very small sizes of English homes in the building regulations. For leasehold reform, the 2024 Act does quite a lot already, but you might question why the same rules don't apply for leaseholds and the right to buy the freehold from a landlord as you have for council homes. So why should there be one rule if you live in a council home and a right to buy a council home, but then more restrictive rules if it's a private landlord? Maybe you should even want to think about turning it around so that actually it should be harder to buy a home from a social landlord or a council because they're creating a public good, and easier to buy from a private landlord because we want to encourage, if you want to encourage more home ownership. By the way, ahead of 21-year plus leaseholds being abolished by the Act, the Earl of Grosvenor is now doing only 20-year leases. So they have a relatively simple way to avoid the possibility that they can be bought out because they just don't have 21-year plus leases that the legislation latches onto. And on home building and ownership. The autumn budget makes some really significant investments in home ownership. There's an extra 500 million from Rachel Reeves, the Treasurer, to boost the Affordable Homes Programme to build up to an additional 5,000 affordable homes. And that brings the total of the Affordable Homes Programme to £3.1 billion per year. And if you do the maths, that results in about an extra 30,000 affordable homes per year. But if you also do a little bit more maths, you can see that that's quite a lot below than the 350,000 homes that are needed to be built to reach the 1.5 million target. So quite a low proportion of houses that are being built will be classified as affordable. So other options to expand home ownership could be these, to go further. First of all, you could let councils compulsorily purchase land more easily, like they used to be able to, without approval from the minister. And you could particularly target what seems to be a major social problem, particularly target vacant properties. You know, why can't a council compulsorily purchase a vacant property if it's just sort of sitting there, or a derelict property? Or if a property owner is just sitting on planning permission and they're not doing anything with it, why not allow the council to compulsorily purchase that property? That would be a relatively simple logical change under the Local Government Act. Another option would be to remove all tax exemptions for vacant and undeveloped buildings, as well as car parks or urban properties. Remove the tax breaks for real estate investment trusts so that corporate landlords don't pay less tax than other companies. Remove the exemptions of housing costs from the inflation calculations that the Bank of England uses, and you could require that all new buildings, as I said before actually, are carbon negative. What are the benefits and costs of reform? Until quite recently, lots of economists said, well, if you do anything with rent regulation, it's going to be bad. It's going to lead to worse housing. And in fact, in 1995, or just a couple of years before, a survey was done, and 93% of economists agreed that a ceiling on rents reduces the quantity and quality of housing. But since 1995, the overwhelming evidence, as I've taken you through some, is not really difficult. It's not really up for debate anymore. That good rent regulation, smart rent regulation works and can improve standards, not decrease standards. And in fact, this was admitted or argued for by a major US landlord. Rent controls will not deter housing investment, he said for the Financial Times just a couple of months ago. So the evidence suggests, in fact, that if we do have a reform for more rent regulation, it will indeed result in fair rents, better standards, and it's likely to result in less house price inflation. So the discussion questions to summarize. First of all, what is the best method or methods of rent regulation? What are the best reforms that we could take to achieve fairly priced homes? And what is the right balance between public and private ownership of housing to achieve good quality and affordable homes? And so with that, I would like to invite Joanna and Leo up on stage, and warm welcome and round of applause for them as discussants. And if you don't want to jump up those stairs there, but I'm sure you can. Yeah, good. Right, so quickly and then ask you to give your remarks. So, first of all, Joanna, Kusiak is a fellow at Cambridge University in an institute called CRASH, the Centre for Research in Art, Social Science and Humanities. She is the author of a new book, which is called Radically Legal, Berlin Constitutes the Future, and it won the 9 Dots Prize. And I think that she also has some book vouchers as well. So this is my copy, but I've been told, which I'm very happy about, that I've been told that I can hand it around if you want to look at. And crucially, Joanna was also a campaigner, a scholar and an activist, for a campaign called Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen. Deutsche Wohnen is a big property landlord in Berlin, and it roughly translates as expropriate this big property company to try and bring it into public ownership. And Leo Pollak is the Director of Housing Policy at the West Midlands Combined Authority, and for a number of years he's been a councillor in Southwark Council, just over the river, and was a leading figure in Southwark's housing policy. So if I could just ask, I'll ask you each in turn to give some remarks. And Joanna, maybe I could start with you. Perhaps you could just explain a little bit about the campaigning work that you were involved in and sort of tie that into what you think a good set of rent regulation and housing policies looks like in an ideal system.
Or in a realistic idea.
Or in a realistic system.
So it was interesting. Thank you also, Ewan, for giving this overview of UK housing policy, because I mean, having lived between two countries, like between Cambridge and Berlin for many years, I want to say the best, the easiest way to shock each other, for Berliner to shock a Londoner is to say, for example, that all rental contracts, or the majority of rental contracts in Berlin are unlimited, right? Like the tenants do have rights, and then it's like, what? And the other way around, like the easiest way to shock a Berlin person is to say in London, actually, you can have mold in the apartment, and they can actually increase your rent or kick you out every year, and you have no way of protecting. Which Berlin is like, how do people live, actually? How is it even possible? And I think, in a way, the value of those exchanges is to show that the art of good politics to make things possible, and to not take for granted the certain minimal standards, but try to expand the vision of what is possible. And in a way, the story of the Berlin Initiative, there's roughly Deutsche Wohnen and Pollak. One is a corporate landlord, so it's a huge corporation that owns over 100,000 apartment units in Berlin. And there are several others. So the initiative targeted specifically corporate landlords that use housing basically for gains of financial markets. So what we criticize is this is when the housing is misused for the purpose of finance. But how it all started, I mean, it started.
Can you hear out the back? Is the microphone working?
Yeah, I was like, I can move the mic on you, like Mike called it. So, and how it all started, I mean, so first, I mean, Berlin has a very long tradition of rental protection. I mean, the first rental protection dates back to 19th century. And it has also the tradition of legally organized tenant unions. So associations, organizations that organize tenants, but organize tenants through law. So for example, I myself, like I managed to sue my landlord 4 times I won, with the help of the tenant union. I describe it in the book as well. And this happened, I'm originally Polish, so this lawsuit happened when I was a student, like especially from Poland. I didn't have German citizenship back then. I didn't have any big monetary power, right? Like so, I wouldn't expect to have this many rights, and I was positively surprised and politicized also by discovering that I have all those rights. And the crucial way in which those tenant unions operate is through the instrument of legal insurance. So there's an insurance where, like, by becoming a member of a tenant union, you pay, I think it's 70 euros per year. But this covers the legal insurance, which means that if it comes to a legal conflict between landlord and a tenant, the insurance covers the lawyer fees and all the legal costs independently if you will not lose. And this is really a game changer because it allows precisely people like me back then who wouldn't risk financially maybe to engage in such a lawsuit because the risk would be too big in case they lose, or for people who know knowledge, that speak the language, who are not lawyers, they can get this help and advice and financial support, which means, because as you know, like in the legal department, I mean, rights are only effective if you can enforce them, right? I mean, to have rights on paper, if you cannot enforce them, counterbring to the level of court, they do not matter much effectively. And this tool of legal insurance allowed for many years not just to have rights, but also to be able to execute the rights, no matter what is the social, economic, or political setting. Also, just for the basic backgrounds, I mean, so Berlin has a long tradition of tenancy. 85% of people rent. So rent is a standard. And it's not because they cannot afford to buy, but it's also been culturally established. And of course, this works because tenancy is very secure. So you can spend your whole life in the same apartment. It is the landlord's duty to keep it mold-free, clean and habitable, right? And you can also take landlords to court if they don't remove mold from your apartment, etc., etc. And you can only increase the rent under specific circumstances. So while most of the housing is not social housing the way it is in the UK, there is this strong rent control. So it's a privately owned housing that however, is under rent control. And then this tenant protection laws, I mean, they stem from the 19th century, but of course also with tradition of political and legal organization and resistance that are progressively strengthened. And for many, many years, one could say that the system worked for many people, like for tenants, right? And no system is perfect, but it was good enough. It was safe, and it gave, and Berlin has valued it, or Germans value it, because it brings you also a certain amount of freedom. And I will come to it in a moment, because also legally it's an interesting case, because within the legal constitution, actually the housing rights, the German constitutions, the housing rights are considered freedom rights. So not just social rights, but freedom rights. And this is decided by the Constitutional Court, I also described in the book, in I think 1997. And it comes, so the German constitution has been written in 1949. So of course, just after Germany was raising itself back from the dark period of Nazism. And in a way, the biggest effort of the Constitution is to ensure that this never happens again. And the core value is very Kantian, I mean, in its spirit, of Germans love Immanuel Kant, and the categorical imperative, so the human dignity needs to be in the center. And in a way, all the basic rights of the German Constitution ensure this human dignity to be involved. And also very much in the Kantian spirit, the Constitution defines freedom not just negatively, but also positively. So it's not only freedom from oppression, but most importantly, I mean, the Article 2 of the German Constitution spells out right to freedom as a right to develop your personality, which means to have this social, like to have this base, secure base. Like basically to be free means to become who you want to be. Like not in the wishful sense, but in a way to be able to realize your human potential and be a free moral agent. And for that, the Constitution acknowledges you need to be free also of dire existential needs. Not just of external oppression, but also of dire existential needs. And based on this freedom clause in 1997, the Constitutional Court decided, and that's an interesting twist, that tenant rights are actually property rights. So then it's not ownership, like as in a civil code. I mean, you cannot sell the apartment that you rent, right? But these are considered property rights in a sense that they realize the constitutional purpose of freedom. And therefore, I mean, like the ruling of the Constitutional Court became very important also in upholding tenant rights and in showing that property is not just ownership of paper, and also importantly in this ruling that the main purpose of property is to ensure this human personal development, and deriving profits from property cannot trump this right to development and nationality, which means in this particular ruling I referred to, that the tenant rights to stay secure are more important than the landlord rights to make more money. Therefore, you cannot just raise your rent as you please, right? I mean, so that has been the base. And based on all this, the legal insurance of tenant rights, the system used to function quite well. And this all has changed around late 2000s, when a new type of landlord emerged on the housing market, the big corporation, corporate landlords. And this has been a game changer because they might be both called landlords, but actually they're very different phenomena. So if with a regular landlord, let's say Henry Leopold, 5 apartments and rents them, there is this still relationship where the tenant is his client effectively, and their rights are this symbiotic relationship. And then, of course, it's not mutual because surely the landlord would want probably more money and the tenant would pay less, but there's still also this symbiosis. Whereas when it comes to corporate landlords, their clients are actually not tenants. The clients are shareholders. And the purpose of the corporation is to maximize the shareholders' profits. And the housing market is just used. So even if those landlords seem to operate on the housing market, actually they primarily operate on the financial market, on using the housing market in order to increase the shareholder values. And that means that no matter what the dynamic of the housing market is, I mean, there's high demand, low demand. I mean, there is also high demand in Berlin, but in a way it doesn't matter, because they still need to, those managers, they are hired to increase the revenue, and the most efficient way of doing it is by certainly raising the rent and by cutting the maintenance costs. This is way more efficient in terms of raising value than building anything, because building is risky, takes a long time. Those managers are mostly in the job for not more than 5 years, because also that's the dynamic of the job market. So they're not going to build, and the stats show they're not building, which is important, because often there's an argument, oh, they should be there because really they build. They do not build. They just extract value, I mean, from housing. And as they appeared on the Berlin housing market, the tenants noticed it's much harder to defend ourselves in the old ways. A, because it's a different scale, so these corporations come with their own legal departments that have a top paid lawyers whose sole purpose is to find everything before the tenant protection law. Because of their scale, they can manipulate these benchmarks, like you mentioned the rent mirror, which is the rent in a given area. If you own 5,000 units, of course, if you raise the bid, you effectively manipulate the whole benchmark, right? So there's the scale effect. And then there's mainly the fact that they subordinate their housing logic to the financial logic. And so the tenant movement in Berlin understood that no matter how, if we cannot defend ourselves with the old game, because that will become a cat and mouse game. Like this is infinite. So what we need to do is we need to really address the structural problems with corporation being an entity, an abstract entity that misuses the housing market for the purposes of the financial market.
May I ask so we saw how low the housing, public housing rate was in Germany. But you were saying that Deutsche Wohnen, a private company, should be brought into the public sector. So,
yes.
So I mean, if I could just sort of ask you on this point, I mean, do you think that a significantly higher proportion of public housing is the answer to the structural?
Well, the question is to start with also, where do they have this housing from? Because it's not the Deutsche Wohnen built its housing. So what happens, of course, Germany, as many other countries, I mean, at some point had this austerity policy and privatization rush, which was not in the it was in the late 90s and the 2000s in response to first Berlin financial crisis. And but unlike UK, where the housing was privatized to tenants, in Germany housing was privatized. The whole portfolios of housing were privatized to this either corporate or financial entities. So instead of selling an apartment to a tenant, the whole package of the whole company privatized for pittance, which is a common story, I think, in many countries, where like wealth below its value has been sold off. And so these companies acquired this housing very cheaply. Then usually there was a chain of transactions of, first some sort of real estate fund buying and selling very quickly, and then it ended up in this corporate hands who try to extract value on a more long-term basis. But so the housing that we're talking about used to be public housing, an important factor, right? Like it's not been built by these corporations, and it was sold off very cheaply. And then what these companies proceeded was they bought it very cheaply and they proceeded to raise rent and extract more and more value. So this has been also perceived as unfair, and especially, and I think this is a crucial cultural difference, because of this tradition of the housing rights, actually people are used to have rights. So do not, when all of a sudden the landlord does not build a multiple apartment, or the heating breaks and no one comes to repair it, people rebel. I mean, they don't just sit there like, well, we never had rights, so we won't have them. But there is really this moral also outrage, that the system that used to work is being destroyed by this corporate entity. There is also still in Berlin this almost like ethics of a public good being destroyed. And so, because I know I have to finish, so I just wrap it up. So the twist in turn is that the housing activists found in the German constitution a forgotten clause which has the status of a fundamental right. It has always been there, but it has never historically been used. It's the Article 15 that allows for what is called socialization. It's the legal term in German speak is Vergesellschaftung. Socialization of land, means of production, or important natural resources for the purpose of public good. And the important thing is, so it's not expropriation. I mean, the initiative politically used the word expropriation. This is not legal jargon, or it's less of legal jargon, so people can understand it. But it is a clause that allows to transform the whole sector by withdrawing certain category of goods from the logic of private market. If you can argue that the domination of private ownership in this sector threatens public goods. And that has been the argument. So the initiative first tested this clause with the lawyer, and turns out it's never been used, but it could work. It organized a big political referendum. We won the referendum in 2021. 60%, nearly 60% of Berliners voted yes to socialize or expropriate this housing from the big corporations, make it public and subordinated under democratic control. This is again important because this is not nationalization. It's really like a new format of how social housing or public housing is public housing, not social housing, because the idea is that all kinds of social groups live there. It's not just for poor people, like it's for everyone. And the premises needs to be democratically managed. So it's more like Elinor Ostrom, Nobel Prize, like winning economist, has this argument that commons needs to be properly managed. So this is a package that includes property and form of management. It's not nationalization, it's opposite to centralized ownership. It's more like cooperative style management, purchasing on a larger scale. And briefly, the history is so the government did not want to legislate it, even if the referendum was won. So it's a long game. Currently, the initiative crowdfunded, but they established a legal commission. The legal commission confirmed it's all well and possible. There's currently conservative government, so they try the game of avoidance delay. They cannot say we won't do it, but it's clearly they want to do it. And the initiative now crowdfunded 100,000 euros and hired a very renowned law firm that is writing the legislation draft, because there's also a different type of referendum possible in Germany where you can put already piece of legislation under the common vote, and then it will be automatically implemented. So this is where we are in the process. It's entirely new and different vision of housing. And the interesting part, maybe as the last sentence, is because the initiative has been active for 7 years, and we saw a massive shift of what is perceived as possible, what is perceived as radical. I mean, at the beginning, like when the initiative was started, even those radical activists, they were like, of course we're going to do it, but we're never going to get majority I realized you will win this, because it was so obvious that we will win this. So there is a huge shift of what's politically possible, and that's maybe what I want to drop in, because this disparity between what's possible is also very clear when you look at what's possible in Berlin and what's possible in London. So what's possible in the universe when it comes to good housing policy should be entirely open for discussion.
So a new vision of housing policy could be based on human dignity. I think so Lee, you were really closely involved in Southwark's policy now, West Midlands. Talk about whatever you like, but what I'm really interested to hear from you is where do you think the government needs to go further and to perhaps achieve some of the objectives, or maybe even larger objectives?
Where to start? I'm going to riff slightly actually on the German experience that you set out, because what's really interesting there is the culture and traditions that we're talking about. I'm conscious in your sort of summary overview of the housing crisis, bits and bobs of law and regulation do not equal real-world culture and practice and resource being put into implementing given laws and resources. So that's really, really important to emphasise, because there's a long list taken on housing policy, for instance, the private rented sector, the Fitness for Human Habitation Act. You've got the Housing Health and Safety Rating System that goes back to the 2004 Housing Act, which is the main tool that local authorities use. You've got decent homes regime. You've got energy efficiency standard regime was introduced a few years ago. You've got AWAB's law that was introduced last year to deal with extreme cases of damp and mould after the death of a 2-year-old boy from respiratory diseases that came from damp and mould. But in practice, none of it means diddly squat, really, if you don't have the state empowered with resources to actually enforce some of those regulations, let alone the cultural practices. And there's a lot to say on cultural practices when it comes to compulsory purchase and get onto. I'll give you a little insight into some of this. So Birmingham, second biggest city in Britain, 1.5 million people, has a private rented sector of over 40,000 homes, many of the pressures in terms of unaffordability, insecurity, non-decency, damp and mould that we talk about. And that city, in terms of the numbers of officers they have to deal with PRS, private rental sector enforcement, 12 officers to deal with. So that's the kind of reality that you deal with there. And obviously I'd encourage, it's really interesting to hear some of the battles you've had in Berlin. Our big battle, and it's a real once-in-a-generation battle, is happening right now on private rented regulation. We've got the Renters' Rights Bill going through Parliament immediately at pace, actually. So I'd encourage you also to have a look at Hansard and the recordings of the committee stage debates between, tenant groups, MPs from different parts of the country, different political parties, you've got the landlord lobby. They're all having it out, but in a context where there is an opportunity to reform some of the fundamentals in private renting. So I would just say, just on private renting score, there's an awful lot that's not there, and seems to be outside of the scope of what's sayable and doable within the government at present, but there are these little kinks that allow for secondary legislation with the minister to enforce a bit further down the line. I think the interesting bit that kind of relates back to the German experience is that the introduction of the landlord database, which gives scope for the tenant's voice to be amplified. We found that in the reviews of particular areas of the West Midlands and London, tenants don't really know their rights. Landlords don't really know their responsibilities unless there is a legal notice that comes through their door, and even then, that's not enough to go with. There's a piece about just tenant feedback on a landlord and on a property whenever the tenancy ends. The most important bit that we've been pushing in West Midlands, the rent control pieces that have a whole tradition and culture and movements that sit behind it. We're asking for rent mirroring as well, but a transition to a desired rent level that's linked to local wages. That will still not get us anywhere near the levels of Berlin style affordability that I have privilege of enjoying for 6 whole months, to my shock, in my 20s. How affordable it was. You know, these are some of the things that we're trying to get through into this bill right now. It's rattling through Parliament. The government are keen to move it quickly, so it's already finished the committee stage. It's going to go to the House of Lords and might be statute by the beginning of the year, by the end of the year, rather. Then there's the point of when it's actually implemented in the real world, local authorities that are critically under-resourced don't have the powers and resources to implement many of those provisions. So there's a whole kind of stage that comes after that. I'll get on to compulsory purchase, because it's one of my pet subjects, but historically, I mean, you know, the rights to private property, as understood in, you know, Article 1, Protocol 1, it's very much a human right to exploitation in this country. And that's a tradition that goes all the way back to habeas corpus and probably beyond. But we do also see it come in waves, the need to socialise rights to land and property and rent regulation. An interesting moment in time is obviously all that followed the Second World War. There was an ethos, a spirit of national solidarity between classes after the experience of the war. And in that point in time, compulsory purchase powers were introduced that allowed land to be expropriated at existing use value. And much, certainly in my experience in Southwark, the vast majority of the council housing that was built in the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s was on land that was seized from major landowners. In fact, our friend Duke of Westminster had much of his land appropriated on the same score during that period of time. But eventually the kind of landowner aristocratic lobby reorganised, got their people back into Parliament, and those powers were chipped away bit by bit. But the problem has returned because, as you see, land speculation is rife. The hope value, which is the speculative premium baked into the valuation of land for the purpose of compulsory purchase, is always the point of reference for land trading generally. We've been working for many years to try and change the compulsory purchase rules and definitions of land valuation. And we got there, actually, earlier this year with the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. This comes back to the original point. It's now law. A local authority with compulsory purchase powers can seize land at an existing use value for the purpose of affordable housing, health and education infrastructure. And I think some of those powers will be taken a bit further, hopefully, with the planning and infrastructure bill that's going to come from Parliament next year. But here's the key thing, coming back to culture, resources, and the reality of it. You can't exercise those powers if, A, you don't have local authorities with the resources to do the surveying work and the fiddly bits and bobs to actually to issue compulsory purchase orders. But crucially, you need local authority officers and politicians to have the will to do it in the first place, and to see that actually it's the land. If you could sort out some of these problems with the land economy, you could bring forward a much deeper pipeline of affordable house building and repurpose land use in a way that delivers a lot more public benefit. So that's a battle to go to be had, that we're kind of halfway through. It was a really kind of interesting moment that we're in.
And so do you think, what more would need to be done with compulsory purchase? Because
it needs to be made simpler, quicker and more affordable, and needs to apply not just to sites that are allocated in a local plan, but also your windfall sites. Actually, if we put that the other way, not just for windfall sites, but for sites allocated in the local plan. It's better to put it the other way around. Certainly in London, that site we showed in Waterloo, across the river, there's one actually just behind this block that has a big war jacket history. But a site like that is allocated in the Lambeth plan.
So it's not your fault because it's Lambeth, right?
Yes,
so
Lambeth.
It's not
Southwark's whole history of crimes on planning as well.
Yeah.
But regardless, because the Lambeth plan says you can build X amount of housing at a lot, if you look at everything around it, like Morris House going up, the book value, the existing use value what the planning permission would deliver is very, very high. So the existing use value of a car park is a lot less than the existing use value of the paper asset that the landowner has and sits on the real estate investment trust. So that distinction of having both allocated sites and windfall sites, so sites that are not specified in a local plan for housing, commercial use, whatever, is critical to making real progress and sorting out the big problems with the land economy.
Great.
I'll get to government spending. That'll be my last bit.
Great. And then you can squeeze in a couple of questions.
One bit you talked about, the miserable fact of nearly £3 billion going into affordable house building. It's worth saying that £30 billion goes into subsidising landlords every year through housing benefits to keep these artificially high levels of private rent in place. And it's a real quirk of how the Treasury, all woven into the Treasury, I think, how they calculate the public value of ensuring that private landlords realise the benefits of their assets. Land value uplift is still the #1 benefit to society when they do their Green Book benefit cost ratio calculations for investing in new housing. And they don't look at the health and well-being of the tenants who might have a secure, affordable, quality home. And they don't have a whole of government accounts approach. They don't look at the impact of social security spending, health spending, crime spending, the rest of it. So there needs to be an absolute sea change in how extremely myopic and stupid Treasury look at the flows of money, including not just investment in landlord subsidy or new supply, but also how they look at the wider taxes that are skimmed off this heavily commodified housing system. So I'll give an example. Stamp duty land tax, which is the tax on a housing transaction, generates billions. And actually that's not really a tax on any kind of externality. It's the reason why RPIX, the mortgage housing costs, are excluded from the inflation calculation, which is that you don't want to look at that because that generates most of the money to the Treasury. It's a really big earner. So if you could hypothecate a tax like that, so this is something I'm writing reports on at the minute in the book, more widely in housing systems, you might hypothecate a tax like that has the externality of huge pressure on the millions of people on the social housing waiting lists, even more millions of people with unaffordable, shitty private rented housing, and put that into improving housing quality and improving the supply of social housing, both new build and existing stock. Then you'll make some progress.
Great, thank you so much. We've got time for let's do a round of questions or comments. Would anyone like to start? Got one here. Any others? Two? Okay, so Joanna first and then...
So just sort of two somewhat related questions on the first, just on the matter of, I guess, comparing Berlin to London and this sort of social, cultural society in that sense. And of course, one of the qualities, I would say strengths in a very qualified term, but I guess one of the qualities of, say, of the property market of this country is I say it's more or less its stability, and even, of course, property is a fairly reliable, viewed as a rather reliable investment, of course, much of all, but especially in this particular jurisdiction, is that, I guess, it's just that matter of how long the moves of our current lineage of propriety rights have run for centuries, as opposed to, say, Germany. And so I guess looking at Berlin, of course, is also a matter of course, one particular half of Berlin before 1990 having, say, more or less regards to quality of more or less universal housing and more or less universal housing, I guess, at least either as stable or at least, I guess, say, as stable leasehold. So to what extent has, compared to London, would you say, perhaps with Berlin might have benefited, I guess, first of all, how sort of possibility, getting rid of that, getting rid of the former, I guess, entitlement system of the DPR, how's the proportion rate of property and house form, I guess, former DPR then incorporated into the modern German system, and clearly perhaps the argument could perhaps be made that due to that, Berlin is sort of, I guess,
How has Berlin benefited from?
As advantages of that as compared to, of course, jurisdictions such as this country, especially London, where the equality rates are much stronger and, I guess, by that sentiment stable. But overall, just realistically,
Okay.
sort of the contrast between that situation.
So the essence of the question is whether Berlin has
Yes,
benefited from the change in its property system?
Yes, I guess just from the sense of it's the different changes, especially in the 20th century, of how property rights might have been sort of upheaval, and how, of course, that's just instability, but at the same time, how that might benefit, I guess, in terms of stability of housing involved.
Okay, good.
Applications to the country.
Great. And question here. Yes, you please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Kusiak. I'm the Renters Reform Coalition.
Great.
Charities that represent tenants. And my question is, one of the things that some of the charities in our coalition are worried about is abuse of especially no-fault grounds of eviction of the renters' rights law has been brilliant. So one of those is a sales ground, which currently doesn't exist in Section 8, it's a new ground. There's evidence that the same equivalent ground in Scotland has been abused in as many as 1 in 5 cases, where a landlord says, oh, you've got to leave because I'm selling. Here's some evidence from an estate agent I've emailed, that I've emailed them. The tenant leaves, and then within 6 months, the property is back on Zoopla Rightmove. It's so easy to abuse, and I'm just wondering, there aren't really that many safeguards in the bill that has written against abuse of that ground and other grounds. I'm just wondering what the panel thinks good safeguards would look like to prevent abuse, because you did mention that one of the ways that tenants will be evicted is through rent hikes, sure, but these ones are also open to abuse, and it's an area of concern for us.
Great. And I saw that you had a question too.
Yes, and I was interested more in terms of the standard of living, the quality of the properties. I'm a child rights scholar, and one of the areas that I'm looking at particularly at the moment is child right to play, and the need therefore for space for play, both in the design of housing, but also in terms of outside the house as well as inside the house. And so I wondered whether we've got this new potential in the bill, talking about the comfort of dwellers. We also have a new bill that's been proposed, but we don't yet have the text of, the Children's Wellbeing Bill, and whether there's any thought that might be sort of a link across those. And then also, this touched on, I think, right at the end, about potential, I wonder whether there's any research, it's not something I've looked at, around the economic benefit of well-being, and whether we can look at selling human well-being as an economic benefit for the state, and then that then changing some of the principle knock-on effects.
And like human dignity and being good to children could be, then it might make sense for the Treasury. Yeah, so please, Leah, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think there's a really big, I'll leave the Berlin one to you, but there's actually some really interesting themes there you were picking at in terms of the sweeping changes to political economy and major historic events, what it does to the housing stock of a city. London's experience actually is really interesting since the war. Large parts of London, including that bit of Waterloo, were absolutely in ruins for many decades after the war. For the South Bank, it was huge numbers to get into there. Where to start on the grounds for eviction? So one amendment I've seen in the Renters' Rights Bill, just on the sales ground, is a restriction on a landlord renting out that property for 3 years after they sell it. Again, I've always come back to this thing: how do you enforce that? How do you make sure that landlord database is tracking this in real time, and coming in like a ton of bricks when they're being back on Zoopla at much higher rents? So yeah, absolutely one of many little kind of wrinkles within the legislation that needs to get kind of on top of over the next few weeks, and it's all very immediate. So yeah, good on you for the fight. I think that your organisation gets up to there. On the children's rights piece, this is really, really interesting. So there's a big piece in the council house building movement, especially in the 70s, where a number of studies actually that looked at the dwelling in and out of the home for prospective children, probably know that. And a huge amount, I think, as well, that has been kind of erased from planning policy and building regulations to make sure that you've got places for playing. Obviously, Bruce's period of council house building is a great history of amazing play space. It's made a small comeback, I think, but it needs to be locked down in law. And in fact, the National Planning Policy Framework that's currently out for consultation, we put in both like Southwark and West Midlands with both my hats on, we put strong submissions in to make sure that there was really critical provision for children's play space, as well as kind of a much more realistic account of the need for family-sized homes, the way that housing needs assessments are made in places always gravitate towards smaller sized home. We've got corresponding high levels of overcrowding, social and private housing, and also very high levels of under-occupation as well in the teams, which is another part of the problem. Yeah, there's lots to follow up on.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, it's interesting because it often comes to mind like this East-West Berlin, but actually housing tenant rights has been slightly different, but nonetheless like common denominator for German East and West. I mean, so as I said, the tradition of tenant right dates back to 19th century, so way before division between socialist and West Berlin. Of course, I mean that there has been parts, especially of East Berlin, that has been aggressively gentrified in the course of early 90s, 2000, and it's almost like a separate story for the Enteignen, especially the successor very committed to districts of Berlin that are now particularly attractive, and there's a lot of story also between East and West, because obviously the purchasing power of the West was much, much higher, and I think that's a big grievance. Some people thought it was also the reasons for such a strong rise of right wing in East Germany, is that basically the East German property has been sold out for business, because there's no, in the unified market was incredibly cheap for West German business and capital to buy up the most attractive properties in the cities of Europe and the Baltic Baltic Sea, and it just economically take over. And that's definitely a source of a lot of deep political controversy still between East and West. But just swinging back to housing, I mean, yes, of course, the sweeping changes into market, but at the same time, the tradition of tenant rights actually goes across them.
And just quickly on Lucy's point about grounds for eviction, I mean, because Germany's got a long history. What do you think? I mean, should we just have fewer grounds for eviction, or is there a sort of I mean, is there a principled approach that you advocate for making sure that people's?
Well, I mean, I think there's this. I mean, in German constitution, there's this dignity running right next to the idea is that there should be a right to housing, and people should have a place to live. But it's hard to realize any other social freedom if you don't have a place to live. I think the interesting distinction here that arises is this distinction between a human and a so-called legal person, that the corporation is, right? Where we see, like, basically in the US, for example, this train has passed. I mean, we have this famous case called Citizen United, where a corporation is giving rights of free speech as if it's a human person. We know, of course, it's a legal fiction, to have rights of a human person. And it's interesting, you know, like often the typical political charge argument against the socialization or expropriation of the corporation is like, oh, but it wouldn't be like in National Socialism, like where Jewish people were expropriated. Well, I mean, no, I mean, like, there's a difference between the democratic decision and authoritarianism, but there's also a difference between, you know, like taking a home from a person who lives in that home and taking shares and expropriating a legal entity that doesn't exist and whose shareholders are basically spread all across the world and avoid taxes by having it registered in Cayman Islands. So this is not the same. And I think that the good point of the German Constitution is, unlike private law, it still makes it very, very clear that the rights of the human person should be above rights of fictional persons. And I personally think it's a good thing, but obviously it's a good question in many cases.
And I think that the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg probably will be agree with that. So human rights are not just country. And just very quickly on your point, I'm a big fan of the idea that we're not going to need as many cars in the future, turning, you know, most of our streets are car parks and reclaiming the streets, as I think a number of cities are doing. I mean, Barcelona is sort of shutting off streets, and that gives more space for children. Thank you very much to discussants. Thank you to everyone for coming. Next week we're doing water. So I hope to see you then, and have a very, very good evening. Thank you. Oh, and yes, Joanna's book. And
If you want to get a book, there is a discount, so they can.
No, I mean, Sorry, Leo, do you have to run off? I'm not going to run off. Oh, okay, great.
My question is just,
So, but when you particularly,
Yeah, sure. In fact, I did.
yes, so discount code to visit. But the whole book is also available on Amazon as well, actually.
But yeah, so
So
I'm
this
very
is for
happy.
the Cambridge University Press. I mean, it is also because tenants I will
thank you very much. Then I will let them know maybe there is a tradition or what they think.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Very well.
So many clashes. I was like, triple clash tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No.
It is recorded, by the way, and so if you would consent, I can post online. If you don't consent, then I can post it. So did they already open up compulsory purchase? I get that.
Yeah, they're looking up. Even when you encourage people to say use a compulsory purchase. Hello.
Hello. Oh, sorry, no.
Hi, Lucy.
No, good to meet you. Yeah, I definitely know about your campaign. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for the invite. I'm an envoy for Generation Men as well.
Yeah,
Based out
thanks so much. Really,
Thank you for
I
being
don't think
here.
we've
I don't know why it's secret.
Cool moment in the film. Where the areas that need to be
Well, I mean,
pushing.
the minister said in committee evidence that affordability is out of scope.
Social democratic
Which is extremely disappointing.
Because with water there, like we're doing this crap bill, and then we'll do a review, and we'll do a good bill.
Well, they're doing the same with housing law reform. I mean, I wonder, when I talk to Labour backbenchers, they say to us, it's just in a state of reform, which, I mean, when was that?
What are the other reforms coming in for private renting?
And everyone keeps referring to it as once a generation.
So are you in the law department?
So it's slightly frustrating, and I'll push back on that.
Just the database. Some of them, you know, the Cowan report. So it was all described quite clearly there. Trying to devolve, there's a push to get devolution of control over some aspects of the database. London, West Midlands. So you can pilot how that works in practice, particularly with the sentence. You might be able to make a bit of progress that way.
And how do you see that working as which elements of it would you want control over?
The database.
Okay.
Well, there are. It's just a database. It's not complicated. Tenant feedback.
Do you want to come for a drink? Great. Because I've got a. Do you want to come for a drink? Great. No problem. Is it okay to go to a pub that has like?
I'm off food.
Yeah, like it's like pretty good price.
For me, I think that the principle would be if it's not super far, because I do need to do some banking.
Maybe the old Bank of England. Let's go to the old Bank of England.
I know.
My name is Gokul. I'm a graduate of LSE in planning. So I just had this question. I was wondering how applicable a tenant union setup in Berlin would be in an English context. Particularly with regards to like the private rented sector, if like the council could
This is
offer
Yeah, I mean there are private renters unions, like there's Acorn,
Acorn's brilliant. We'd really recommend it.
there's Generation Red, there's all the organisations you work with. So the extent to which they have the kind of the clout and the tradition and culture and the deep history behind them in the way that you heard from Germany is debatable, really. But I think when things get so bad, you have a change of government and opportunities to change legislation. Now's the big time to ask that question. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I was wondering
we don't have a
particularly.
tradition, but like how you build a tradition, you join the renters union.
Yeah, particularly in the reference to like the legal insurance bit, do unions in the UK have legal insurance?
That's a really good question. I don't know, actually. I think some of them probably do. There's a whole range of them, and they range from being very, very far to the left and doing a lot of political campaigning, and then some of them are a bit more kind of focused on building power in communities and that sort of thing. I'm sure some of them do some of the legal work, but I don't know off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
All right, yeah, because I was wondering if the council could, because like this doesn't require financial resources and councils are always hamstrung for resources usually, if they could, organize communities into these unions and then empower them with legal insurance, which could then...
I've tried to do exactly that in a part of the world in Southwark where you'd think they'd be the most interesting. It's very hard. Private renters are normally working paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have the time actually, for the most part, unless they've got someone paying for their rent most of the time, to be involved in things like that. So I think making really simple tools that ensure the tenants know their rights first and foremost, but also to promote visibility of their perspective is really important. There's a little thing called Marks Out of Tenancy that you might know about. It's just a charity that set up a database where tenants could mark their landlord, basically. But now you've got a national statutory database. You can essentially take on one like that and make it kind of enforceable and comprehensive. So every single private rented home, if you're looking to, before you're looking to rent, or you're trying to set up, or you're a regulator looking at what's happening in a particular home, you can just look up that property and see what the history of it, what its environmental performance is, what previous tenants have said about the landlord and about the property.
If the landlord has used the sales ground for eviction every year for the past 5 years,
All
maybe
of it.
using it.
Visibility is the key thing. I think a lot of the issue with private renting is it's not visible. Even housing quality in private renting is really invisible. Like most private rented enforcement teams and local authorities, even when they've got selective licensing, it's still very reactive. Someone comes up with I've got a serious life, major health hazard, and they know to report it. Then the inspection comes along and the improvement notice might follow, or penalties or whatever. But it's very reactive, it's not proactive. So getting to the point where it's proactive, when you've got the visibility, is where the action is, I think. It's all about, if tenants will know that other tenants are suffering like they are. But the other weird thing with the culture here is that because home ownership is so out of reach for most people, most incomes, that in order to get a deposit to get a home, you need the support of your parents. So how you were born is the most important factor, and that ends up pervading everyday culture and relationships. It's almost like a Jane Austen type universe where, but slightly less explicit than it was in the Victorian times, or Georgian times even. So the unions are a good basis for organising. If they've got good information about what's happening, then they can organise them well. But if they're atomised...
With regards to like the visibility point which you just mentioned, I feel like, the presence of like a pan, at least like within a borough, pan-borough single union would mean that, there's the apparatus for people to like cross-reference and understand.
So we put funding in to do exactly this, and we invited Acorn to set up a renters union for Southwark, and it's just like, it's not worth the effort and the resource, to be honest, because people don't have the time and the energy and the...
It was an initiative from the council.
Yeah.
Maybe also, if it's the council taking the initiative, people
Exactly.
don't get as excited.
We were always conscious of that. We were looking like, what's the bottom-up way that we can do this? And we'll support anyone to create this. We got a lot of flack from private landlords saying, what are you doing? It's like,
Surely not from private landlords.
yes.
Usually such a quiet group.
Yeah, they're notoriously well organised. When you're seen at the select committee hearings, it's fascinating. It's worth watching the videos of the hearings earlier in October. first sort of round of hearings, because they got people from your organisation.
Yeah, my boss said it.
Yeah, from every kind of corner of the hunting arena. They were all there and putting their best case forward. You had the view of MPs. I found Matt Pennycook like refreshingly well informed.
He's very good at
for a housing minister.
housing
We've had terrible housing ministers, and it would change every year under the Tories. Ridiculous number we got through because it just wasn't a priority. If you were housing minister, you were good, you'd be seen promoted. So something more important, but actually, we need Matt Pennycook to feel like actually this is a major ministry of state that I've got hold of. I want to stick with this for at least 10 years and see it through. You know, it's so important who the minister is. Like, it's not going to happen otherwise.
One of the discussions included the idea of an autonomous person in the housing market, which just like treating the housing as a commodity and us as just players in the market.
Well, in terms of like mass landlords and
No. Like each one of us participating in a market rather than consuming basic needs, like treating the housing as a market, as a commercial market, rather than and assuming that each one of us is an autonomous individual, not connected to our social status or financial status, or as you said, maybe most of my friends had, and my parents bought me a house, and their friends bought their house, and like the social world.
Yeah, I mean, when we advocate for things that are considered to be like quote unquote radical, the landlord groups will always say, "Oh, but what about us? You know, we're people too, and it's so important that we're viewed as kind of people, and these are our possessions, and we have a right to enjoy them or whatever."
So because most of the legislators are landlords, I guess.
A lot of them are, but I think there's a lot of tenants. There's more and more who are tenants now, just because there's more and more private tenants, and the cohort now is younger. The Labour cohort is quite young. Quite a lot of them have either current or very recent experience of private renting, and a lot of MPs who are homeowners and who even are landlords, some of them also are renters because they have to have a bottle in London if they're coming in from West Kilbride or wherever. So some of them do have the experience, and we can try and appeal to that. But this is a point that we always try to make, that we have, for example, we have an energy price cap because we recognise that it's absolutely vital that people can heat their homes, and so we say there is an upper limit on the profit that can be taken on that because it's a human need. So why don't we have the same for in tenancy rent caps or rent control? Because these are human needs in the same way. The precedent is there. It's just about making the link. But as you say, the landlord lobby is so good at making the case for itself.
And the Treasury view of this is really important as well, because those highly commodified, inflated property values are the asset base of banks. And if that asset value drops in any big significant way, the ability of banks to lend goes down, circulation of money through the economy collapses, as we saw in 2008. And given how heavily leveraged we are to our property in Britain in particular, the economy's screwed. So they always have to play this game of following the conceit of very high property values, and with it the expectation that landlords get these supernormal returns from renters.
Do you think the landlord...
It's my bleak view of it, unfortunately.
The numbers win eventually.
Yeah, they will.
Do you think that, you mentioned that the land value uplift is like the first thing on the Green Book calculation, like cost benefit analysis? Do you think that that could be one of the reasons why the house prices have been increasing at this alarmingly high rate?
It just shows how deeply ingrained it is in Treasury thinking. Like they've tried to introduce like various bits of social value and economic value and well-being, all this stuff. I saw Treasury only just like this week put out a series of new research questions for themselves to. They've given an invitation to academia to try and understand what on earth they're doing. So you should all respond to it. Pile in. The land value uplift thing, that's seen as a benefit to society, and that's there in the communities and local government Green Book appraisal guide that was basis for saying why you should have investment in affordable housing in any instance, be it a program level or a project level. So, yes, it's really bad, particularly given that we spend almost 10 times the amount on landlord subsidy for housing development. That's money just goes in. Right? So, and that's the kind of big cap on what would be an explosion of homelessness and the private rented problem kind of growing to a far greater scale. So this cap is just like a frog in boiling water. It's just kind
So not
of
working.
bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, it's
Like
really
record
great.
numbers of people in temporary accommodation,
Yeah, it's
and
mad.
some local authorities spending like half of their budget now on temporary accommodation. So it's not even working to prevent homelessness.
Yeah, so the council's a bust, and that lobbying line has got through a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, when systems change, I think. Well, look, there's moments. I mean, you think of like, yeah, there were lots of landlords, Tory landlords, who were preventing the previous renters reform bill. It was part of the Tory manifesto to get rid of no fault evictions. They didn't do it because of the landlord MPs preventing them from doing it. Now Labour are in charge. There's still some Labour MPs, but I think of Jazz Athwal, who's a Redbridge MP, owns, what was it, 15 homes or something. And lo and behold, terrible damp and mould in many of those homes, crappy conditions, tenants complaining, and him not doing anything about it as a former council leader as well. So I find moments like that really useful because they create shame and they shift the culture a little bit about what is and is not acceptable. But you need more moments like that to get to people's minds. So I don't know, what's the next?
Well, we'll get through the renters' rights bill.
Yeah.
Then we'll reconvene.
Should we walk and talk? Because